All right, we're here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live, wherever you may be joining us. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day here at 110 Daily. Chris Brown, Josh Doring, in their correct boxes on the overlay, I might add, are here with me to break down a wild weekend in the NFL world. We made it through the divisional round. We're here to talk about it. Josh, Chris, how you guys doing?
I don't know if you can call it wild anymore because we've lost the whatever words you want to use of the wild card round.
The what? Will you run that back for me one more time?
It's not the wild card round anymore, so you can't say it's the wild card round.
Okay, well then we need to come up with a word. If we can't use wild, if wild is sort of like the Super Bowl and it's copyrighted for wild card
I'm not
weekend.
even saying it's copyrighted. I'm just saying you lost kind of the stupid little joke there.
Right.
That's all.
And there certainly was. I feel like on a weekend that the four teams that I picked to win won, that I can't really use the term wild quite as appropriately as I could after wild card weekend, but considering what happened, I think that maybe we can come up with at least a synonym. There we go. For the word, because there certainly were some wild qualities to what we saw over the last 2 days.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we had some interesting games, and part of it is we had some interesting storylines to follow moving forward now and into the next week for sure.
So we're here to talk about it. We're going to break it down into two segments today. We'll break down the agenda for you real quick. We'll start in the AFC, specifically with what happened on Sunday afternoon at Arrowhead, and then we'll talk about the other AFC matchup over the weekend, and then we'll hop over to the NFC, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. There might not be a more epic trio of... Have there ever been a more historically great trio of quarterbacks like that? I mean, not just in general, but like all playing on the same weekend, and the fact that all three of them are over the age of 37. I just feel like we don't usually get to that point where the history of those three quarterbacks sort of coming together all at once. But we'll start in the AFC. We'll start with the Browns and Chiefs. Of course, the headline there, Patrick Mahomes out with the concussion in the third quarter. The Browns come back and score. Chad Henne doing Chad Henne things. Josh, we'll start with this. Were you ever worried that the Browns were were you ever worried that the Chiefs were going to lose this football game? If so, when?
Oh, I was absolutely worried, particularly after that second touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Baker had the ball and a chance to win the game. Did I feel great about the Browns' chances? No. But Baker played, by and large, well. And, yeah, that Chad Henne interception just scared me considerably. But there's also the reality that when Patrick Mahomes left, this game was 19-3. And they basically had a guaranteed field goal. And then the field goal wasn't guaranteed. And they didn't obviously move the ball that drive, so they had to take the field goal, but then they missed it. And then you also go back to what ultimately I think is going to get lost in this, which is what happened right before halftime. Because at that point you went, oh, that was the Browns' chance to get back in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, those 7 points made the difference because of what happened in the second half, where you've got the fumble into the end zone. That's just a dumb rule, but we don't need to spend time on that because everybody agrees it's a dumb rule. That was also a personal foul for a helmet-to-helmet hit.
Yep.
Why that's not reviewable and how the referee missed that, I don't know. But if we're going to harp on it in the college game, we need to get those calls right at the NFL too, or you need to be able to challenge for them.
Yep.
If you care about player safety. So the Browns caught an awful break there. But then when Baker threw the interception, I thought, it ultimately doesn't matter. That would have kept the game competitive. But then all of a sudden, Mahomes gets hurt. They missed a field goal. The Browns score a couple touchdowns, and we've got a football game. And then Chad Henne turned into Lamar Jackson. I mean, not
Well, he
really,
turned
but
into Patrick Mahomes for one play. That's
yeah,
what that was my thing after that play. Is that that's the play that Patrick Mahomes would have made in that moment. He would
Yep.
have just. I mean, and I don't know if Chad Henne just decided before the play started that he was going to run it because he took no time whatsoever to. I mean, not really to look down the field, but the decisiveness with which he made that play, and then of course Andy Reid showing again why he's just second to none when it comes to play calling in the NFL right now is, of course gets the first down to actually seal things, but that was my main sort of like thought after that. I was like, he looked like Patrick Mahomes. That was the decisive play. That was the I mean literally Aikman, who was on the call? Was that was Nance and Romo, right?
yeah, that was Tony Romo.
Romo literally seconds before that was talking about 3rd and 14. Patrick Mahomes is gonna make a play, whether it's with his legs or through the air. Literally seconds before that, and then Chad Henne goes and makes the exact same play that I would have expected Patrick Mahomes to make in that moment. But yeah, at the end of this game, I caught myself wondering who had the shorter, like, who was given more opportunities. I couldn't decide if the Browns were on the short end of the stick or the long end of the stick and didn't capitalize
Yeah.
on it. Because of course you have the play at the goal line. I'm the conversations always are just a little annoying to me because the rule is what the rule is right now. So like, yes, change the rule, but other than that, let's move on. Like, I don't want to talk
Right.
about that all day today, and people are 100% going to talk about that all day today. Um, but at the same time, Harrison Butker just like couldn't knock down a field goal that was the roughly the distance of an extra point, and Patrick Mahomes is out for 35% of the game, 40% of the game. I can't remember exactly when he went out, but the point is that like the game should have been 26-17 because Harrison Butker misses a field goal that's 33 yards and misses an extra point attempt. I couldn't decide if you know the Browns got really unlucky and how would the game have changed if they don't turn the ball over in the end zone like that, or if the personal foul is called. But also at the same time, they got handed points essentially by the Chiefs special teams unit, and then you don't have Patrick Mahomes, and all you have to do is be better than Chad Henne essentially for. And then Baker had opportunities, and Baker didn't come up with big plays. I mean, Baker played okay, but Baker playing okay was 23 of 37, 204 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. I mean, that's just. I mean, Chad Henne was 6 of 8 for 66 yards. I mean, he had the horrible interception, but apart from that, he was functional and was good enough that the to not give the Browns too many chances. But I couldn't decide if the Browns were lucky or unlucky at the end of this game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it was a little bit of both because obviously that was unlucky with that play, but they made multiple mistakes to kind of do this to themselves. With Nick Chubb dropped multiple passes in this game, a lot more than I would have expected. You have Mayfield throwing that interception to start the second half. Cleveland couldn't run the ball in the first half hardly at all, and they weren't doing much of anything to stop Patrick Mahomes in his passing game before his injury either. So it's one of those situations where, right, you obviously can't predict what happened in the Chiefs and to Mahomes. You can't predict that to happen. But when those kind of things happen, you have to capitalize by not making mistakes yourself. You have to play. I mean, this is the Chiefs, and your best chance of beating them a lot of the time, if is if something happens to them in one way, shape, or form, and you are able to capitalize by not making mistakes. And something did happen to the Chiefs. Obviously, it could have been injuries, errors, whatever. And something did happen to them, and the Browns just weren't there to capitalize because there were too many mistakes in too many areas that weren't going to allow them to get that momentum. I will say one thing I think was really impressive on the other side of this um, was uh, the Chiefs' offensive coordinator and the game that he and their offensive offensive strategy. I don't know how you say his last name, Eric
Bieniemy.
Bieniemy, thank
Get
you.
that man a
Bieniemy.
head coaching job. My
He
goodness.
needs a head coaching job. It wasn't just that, of course, they have a great offense. We all know that. But I think he really worked up a perfect game plan to capitalize on the Browns' defensive weaknesses. And the Chiefs ran 63 offensive plays. They only faced 10 third downs. They were just this machine of converting first down after first down. Right? Obviously, we know what happened down the stretch, but I think it was just another example of how, yes, it was the Browns, and yes, the Chiefs' offense should be able to do that to the Browns. But I think it was a really good job of strategizing for your opponent and playing and strategizing to attack their weaknesses.
That's ultimately where I come down on this, is that the Browns got lucky, not unlucky. The biggest play of this game was Mahomes getting hurt, obviously. And it was, look, that could have been, 26-3 if he's healthy?
At least, if not 30-3, because we're making extra points.
Right. And then you've got the second half to continue to go and build. They couldn't stop him.
No.
They were given an opportunity because he got hurt, and they outplayed the Chiefs the rest of the game. The problem was they had built themselves such a deficit because they couldn't stop Mahomes, and they had almost 300 yards of offense in the first half, that they just couldn't do quite enough to overcome that deficit because they had to score on every possession, not 2/3 of their possessions or 75% of whatever that number you want to throw out. Because they did score points and Baker delivered, but they just couldn't make that final drive that could have decided the game. They came up short.
I mean, I suppose. I mean, I have a hard time giving Baker Mayfield credit when he just he was okay. I mean, they scored 17 points and he threw for 200 yards. I mean, it's not a tall task to be better than Chad Henne for a quarter and a half.
Right. No, not at all.
I mean, and yes, he was kind of better than Chad Henne in the time that Chad Henne was in the game, but also at the same time, Chad Henne made the biggest play that a quarterback made after Patrick Mahomes came out, and I think that's ultimately, I think that's the best way to put it here, is that, right, the Browns were able to, and to a certain extent, use the momentum that they had to make the Chiefs sweat and to make them make stops and make them get first downs. But when a team needed their quarterback to absolutely make a play, it was Chad Henne who made that play, and of course that play ultimately keeps Baker Mayfield from being able to even get back on the field. But and I also just have a hard time feeling bad for the Browns when the Chiefs were just so far and away the better football team. Like, I mean, right, like you said, Josh, if Mahomes doesn't get hurt right there, they probably score a touchdown. So we're talking about 26-3, and we might be talking about a 30-point win for the Chiefs. Like, I would have been, quite frankly, I would have been disappointed if the Browns won this game, because I mean, and depending on what Patrick Mahomes is in, a week from now, and if he plays or if he doesn't play, the Browns would get smoked by the Bills. I mean, in a similar fashion, I think, to the way that they were getting smoked by the Chiefs until Patrick Mahomes came out. So that's another part of this for me here, is that I have a hard time being upset about the outcome of this game when it was so clear, when both teams had their best players on the field, who was the better team. Bills, Ravens, 17-3. Of course, the other guy who's always in the conversation for one of the 3, 4, 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL, also leaving this game with a concussion. Buffalo gets a 14-point third quarter, wins this game 17-3. Another game that I just wasn't expecting to see as few points as this. I mean, even when, and heck, one of those touchdowns was a defensive touchdown. So we're only talking about one offensive touchdown in this game that has Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, and J.K. Dobbins and Stephon Diggs, and throw anybody else you want in there. But this was another one of those games that you have to wonder what might have happened if Lamar Jackson gets to play the end of this game, and I'm not sure he would have led them back, but at least he would have had an opportunity to lead them back. But another one that I was pretty surprised by the sort of ebb and flow of this game.
Yeah, this was a really, really ugly start to the game. The first half of this game was just not pretty. Like the two teams combined for 4 of 12 on third down attempts in the first half. It was not. I was like scratching my head, like what are we watching in the first half of this game? And then, right, the one thing you do notice is that the Bills right away are committed to blitzing Lamar Jackson at well above their typical rate, and it is something that eventually won them a playoff game. Of course, the defining moment was that interception you just mentioned, Josh. The Baltimore was at the Buffalo 9-yard line. They were down by 7 seconds left in the third quarter, and then that interception was returned 101 yards, and ultimately ended up being the difference in this game. Being potentially a one-score game, and I see with Lamar Jackson, a player whose resurgence in the second half of this season allowed the Ravens to get to where they are, obviously. But you also see a Baltimore team that's going to have to figure out how to be a more competent passing club, less reliant on the running game, because this is now a second straight postseason where a team loaded up on stopping their running game, and the Ravens were unable to answer. The Bills knew what they were doing. Everybody knew what the Bills' intent was going to be coming into this game, and they focused in on making Jackson beat them with his arm, and making the Ravens beat you through the air, and they don't have an answer to do that. They made the Ravens uncomfortable. They never looked. There was never a point in this game where I thought the Ravens looked comfortable in really any aspect. So real credit to Buffalo for that. Um, it was a very strange game. I just think that's sort of a sign that being the best running team in the NFL, if you want to call the Ravens that, is just not enough on its own in most cases to be able to make a deep postseason run. That was sort of my really big takeaway from this. I know there are a lot of specific things with this game, but I think it kind of illustrates you have to be more multidimensional than that. We knew if Lamar Jackson could get going, of course, he eventually gets hurt, but we knew if he could get going, that he could hurt them on the ground. But I was always more confident in the Bills' ability to beat you through the air, and that game would eventually prevail. I just think that the Ravens showed again that you have to be more multidimensional.
And yet the Ravens had more rushing and passing yards than the Bills in this game.
They did. But we have one team that stepped up when it mattered, and one team, it comes down to those couple of plays.
And ultimately, defense wins in the postseason. And the story of a couple of these games this weekend, this one and the Tampa Bay New Orleans game that we'll get to, was turnovers or a turnover.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Ravens were going down to answer the Bills' touchdown right after the second half, and I thought, okay, well, here we go. Josh Allen makes it look easy. Lamar Jackson's team's going down the field. We're going to get some points in the second half.
Yeah.
And then the interception, and then that was basically it. But the Bills just decided, look, they stopped Derrick Henry last week. We're not going to run the football. We're just going to throw 4 or 5 wide receivers out there every play and let Josh Allen do his thing. It wasn't the Brian Dable's greatest moment as a play caller, but it was enough. Their defense made a play. And also, Justin Tucker never does that. And so you've got this bizarre series of events, and ultimately, I think I agree with you that it's fair to say, Chris, that the Bills were just more prepared to win a bizarre game like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because of their ability to get the ball down the field, because they don't have to generate big plays through the running game. They can do it through the air. Now, they weren't very successful at it in this game, but they just had a little more versatility. I just have a hard time continuing to pile on Lamar Jackson, but it goes to the same point of, it's not that I don't think he can succeed in the playoffs. It's just I'm not going to pick him to do so until he actually does. And those are two different things for me.
I mean, he wasn't good in these playoffs either. He wasn't good against the Titans. He had one play that he made because he's Lamar Jackson. But
right.
We talked about this last week. Baltimore scores 13, 16 points. The only reason they scored the decisive touchdown in that game, which was that 50-yard run by in the playoffs, if that play doesn't happen for him, then he's a very average quarterback from
this season,
or last season.
Well,
in the playoffs,
he put up numbers. He just turned the ball over. That one I'm more willing to excuse.
Okay, I mean that's cool, but it's 2 years in a row that the Ravens haven't really had a chance to win these games because of a mistake that he made. I mean, you're feeling completely differently about this game, even if it's 10-6 even if he does come out of the game. But when you're down 17-3 and you have to bring your backup quarterback in, the task seems almost impossible. I mean, for Tyler Huntley, I had zero faith in him to make that happen, but because he would have had to do it multiple times, right? I'll put it this way: I was solidified in my feelings about Lamar Jackson, the playoff quarterback this year, even though they won a playoff game. Because if he doesn't have a 50-yard run, which of course is part of his game, so I can't say that didn't happen and say that that's not a part of why he's so good, because it of course is. But it was another playoffs that I was left wanting more from Lamar Jackson. It's just at least for me, it's that simple. And of course, if he doesn't get hurt and he comes back and they score 14 unanswered, and then they go to an overtime and they win, then we're talking about Lamar Jackson, the guy who delivers in the divisional round. But so maybe it's unfair to expect that he wouldn't have been able to lead them back, but he made the mistake that made this game feel even more lopsided than it probably actually was.
Yeah, he just hasn't, and I did read this from someone who's covering the team. He just didn't make the progress as a passer that the organization was hoping that he could this year. And right, that's going to leave yourself open to mistakes when you're under that pressure that he has to pass, because right, when you have a team that's able to put the pressure on you just to hold you to, he was averaging under 4 yards per rushing attempt. When a team is just sort of daring you to put the ball in the air, to make big plays through the air, if you have a quarterback who just isn't comfortable, hasn't made those steps forward, it's going to be prone to those mistakes. And so that's where I still kind of, and look, I'm not saying this as not a Lamar Jackson is horrible and I'm trying to criticize him till December or anything, but it's one of those things where it kind of comes back to, in some sense, your ability to, like we said before, adjust to the game circumstances, adjust to what your opponent is giving you and what your opponent is refusing to give you. And you have a Ravens team that just didn't seem to be, with it includes Jackson, but isn't just exclusively Jackson, isn't able to make that pivot when things are tough, to do things a different way and be effective and be mistake free and doing things a way that they would prefer not to do.
And where that where that's the most obvious is in the red zone, when things are congested. I mean, they were 1 for 6 in the playoffs in the red zone. That's just not good enough. Now, and I'm not sure if ESPN, if Justin Tucker makes one of those field goals, if that counts as a red zone. I'm not sure if it's touchdowns or otherwise, but the point is still the same, is that, right, Lamar Jackson is absolutely terrifying when he has a ton of room to work with. And then it was the same thing that Ohio State was trying to do with Alabama. They're going to let you move the ball. We're going to keep you in front of us. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to bear down when we have a lot, when the end zone is almost our friend when we get to the red zone, because you're just running out of room for Devontae Smith to get clear and Najee Harris and whoever. Right, it's it's when Lamar Jackson has to make decisions in tight spaces and you turn him into just the nature of the game, turning him into a more traditional quarterback in the red zone just because he doesn't have as much room to work with, that's when the idea of not having the most confidence in your arm right now, and I think it's fair to say that that's the case, right? I mean, he had some nice plays with his arm, but I think it's fair to say that you'd like your quarterback to have a little bit more faith in his arm than Lamar Jackson does right now. And that's really where that kind of thing rears its ugly head, because it's just harder to be dynamic in the red zone because there's less room to be dynamic. But that's the AFC. We got the Chiefs and the Bills in the AFC Championship game. It's time to pat ourselves on the back, right? I believe we all three had Chiefs Bills in the AFC Championship game, I believe. So nice little pat on the back for the boys here at 110 Sports. Coming up next, we'll hop over to the NFC side of things, and then if we have time, we'll throw some winners and losers from the weekend. We'll do all of that next. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.